Okay, let's open project number 4 here on new color filters and take a look at 4 brand new filters inside After Effects 6 for adjusting color inside our image. Now the file that's just opened up, just hit 0 and do a RAM preview of that. And it's again the same cab clip that we saw earlier on in one of our lessons. And we're going to use this for some color adjustment. Okay, so that's just another high-speed clip we've got. I'll sped this up a little bit for the old style footage. What we're going to do is use a filter first that's called Change to Color, and we're actually going to change the color of these taxi cabs. Very interesting little filter. I really like it a lot. Now, if you come down to the timeline and select the bottom layer here, number 4, this is the Cabs movie, the QuickTime movie we're seeing in the background. I'm just going to select that, and then in my effects palette, I'm going to go ahead and type in the name of this filter. I'm just going to type in the word change, because the filter is called Change to Color. Don't get it confused with Change Color. This is a new one here called Change to Color. Go ahead and double click to apply that and bring up the Effect Controls window. And if we just drag this over here, we can see exactly what this filter is going to do. Basically, it changes a selected color in the image, whichever one we choose, to a completely different one using hue, lightness, and saturation values, which makes it very cool for very quick color replacement and leaves all the other colors in the image unaffected. So it's a very simple filter to use. The first thing we have is to choose the From color, the one which we're going to change from. So go ahead and pick up the eyedropper tool. And we can pick up pretty much any color over here on the cab. It's kind of divided into 3 separate areas. We have the lighter yellows in the top section here where the sky pretty much is reflected. We have a side value here which is a medium, and then the actual side of the car is a lot darker. So I'm going to go along the side here for that medium value and pick that up as my sample, and you see immediately all my cabs have changed to red. It's really that simple. By default, it's using a hue value change, so it's shifting whatever was yellow and using hue, changing it to white. And just the way that hue actually works, it's changing it to red. A little bit confusing, so let's try something different. I'm going to take the 2 value here, which is white, go ahead and click on there, pick myself a brand new color. So let's maybe go for more of a blue. Let's take one of our lighter blues over here and say OK. And we can see immediately the color of the cabs changes to a blue. Now you can always go ahead and do a preview of that and see exactly how it looks. It's really cool. Not only is the first cab colored, but every cab that comes along containing that yellow value has been updated to blue. It's a very simple and very quick filter to use. Now there's obviously a few things in there we can mess around with, but you see in its most basic form, it's done a brilliant job of color retouching. Now let's just click and cancel the preview and come back here to the Effect Controls and see what other options we have. We have here how it actually changes the color, and we've seen that we've got it set to hue at the moment. We could set it to adjust the hue and the lightness, in which case it will bleed across into some of the background because there's lighter pixels there as well. Or we can do just hue and saturation, which won't affect any lightness. Or we can do all 3. Okay, so you can pick pretty much any of these, but by default, the hue angle is a pretty good one to go with because that's the type of change we want to make. Now you also have a change by, in which we can say setting to color or transforming to color. Transforming to color does a slightly better job of blending the pixels, but to tell you the truth, it's all based on really the color that you're changing it to. You'll try this on one, and then if you set another color and go back to setting to color, it will look almost exactly the same. So really, it's one of those choices that you make as and when you pick a different color, okay? Now the tolerance value here is obviously very important. This is how much of the color is being adjusted. So if I drop that down, let's just pull out to the side a little bit, we can see that my hue tolerance is set to 5. So really it's picking up on the lowest 5% of all the yellows in the image and changing that to that new blue. So if I do click on that and drag, you'll see that after a point, we start to affect pretty much all the other yellows in the image, which obviously relates to the color in the trees, because that's obviously greens, which is made up very much of the yellow color as well. So the more we increase that, the more it will flow into that background. So if you want to fine tune that and bring it back down, you can stay for a value of maybe 3, 4, or 5, and you're pretty much guaranteed to get just the car. Now you can obviously adjust the lightness and the saturation as well, depending again on which color you're affecting and which color you're changing it to. And each one of these will have different effects on the image depending on how you try it. And because we're using hue, it's pretty much only the hue value here that's going to change. If we had any one of these set, obviously these values here would make changes as well. But for this particular instance, I'm keeping everything set down the line of hue change, so I'm just going to undo, set that back to where it was. Now you also have a softness value here as well, which gently softens out the edge, and you can view that really by looking at this option called the correction matte. If we turn that on, it gives us a grayscale view, or pretty much black and white, of what's going on with a color change, and you can see it's picking up some of the options here in the trees, but it's not affecting them because our hue value is set to 5. What we've done is gone ahead and chosen the yellow, and it's recognizing these are all the yellow items that it sees inside our image, but we're controlling that by just doing the hue here. So really that's a good point to work with just to start from. But if we come back here to softness, it's set to 50%. We can drag down on that and that will harden out the edges, or we can increase on that and it will soften the edges. Again, you have that choice. But whatever we set that to, let me just set that back by undoing it to 50%. You can see that it's very easy to apply that one color change. Feel free to go back into the 2 color, pick a completely different one. Let's go for a bright orange. Color changes immediately. Let's go back and maybe choose a green. Again, the color is automatically updated and a RAM preview will show us a whole batch of brand new colored cars simply done with that one filter. That's how cool the new change to color option is inside AE6. Well, let's click to stop the preview and close the effect controls window down for this one. We're going to look at a second option here called the paint bucket filter, and this works almost exactly the same as the one in Photoshop, and it's a very welcome addition to After Effects. Let's come down to the timeline and turn on layer number 2. Again, it's that Steve Keyed clip that we saw just a second ago in our black and white one, and we've used it again just to place a presenter or news reporter over the background here, and we're going to change the color of the shirt in this clip. So what we need to do is make sure that layer is selected, and then come across to the effects and let's type in paint. And that will come up with all the options we have, and we're going to choose this one here, Render Paint Bucket. Double click to apply that to our layer, and immediately it will all fill with red, but don't panic, we'll change that in just a second. So let's pull the effect controls over here. There we go. And we can see initially that it is set to fill selection of color and alpha. Now don't forget this image is on a complete alpha channel background, so we're going to change that just to straight color so it does not affect the overall alpha channel. It's all to do with the tolerance that we have. But once we adjust that tolerance value, we can bring it back down. Now, at the moment, it's got an effect point or a fill point. Now, this is the paint bucket click, if you imagine it inside of Photoshop. And wherever that point is clicked, it will fill surrounding pixels based on their tolerance. Well, that point is right here in the very center of my layer. And if I pick that up and move it around, you'll see that once I come over onto a different area of color, such as skin on the face or on the arms or even into the hair, we can define different areas that are going to be filled with that color. And imagine even animating this point, it could do some very interesting things. But I'm going to set that kind of centrally onto the face there, and I'm also going to zoom up to 100% using the period key. Let's just scrub over here and also change this to full quality so we can see good image. There we go. And then if we come back here, we can look at the different options. So the tolerance is obviously going to decide how many pixels we go forwards and backwards around this area, and how many pixels basically get pulled in and filled with that same color. So if we do increase, we can push out into the hair because the tolerance is getting larger, or we come the other way and it will obviously use fewer pixels and give us a much smoother area. Now, probably a value of 40 or 50 would be good. Just for now, we can always try it. And you can always view the threshold as well, very similar to what we saw a second ago, gives us a grayscale view or a black and white view of the mask that we're creating. So go ahead and turn that off again. We also have the type of stroke here. Now, it's kind of confusing because it does look like it's a fill, and effectively it is. But at the moment, it's set to anti-alias, so it's just a general slightly feathered edge. We can also choose feather here, and now the feather option becomes available, and we can use that to smooth out the effect there and basically blend it in a little bit more depending on the values that we choose. Let's just undo that a second. You can also choose to spread. Now, this will take the area that you've got because you might reach a point in tolerance where it gets just about everything, and then you move just one tolerance point on, and all of a sudden the color goes all the way outside because it just reaches that one point where it can't distinguish between those 2 pixels. So the spread value will allow you to keep the current tolerance, but increase the area that it's taking up without actually choosing a new value. And obviously the spread radius there, you can just push that in or out as you want to. Okay, so that's a pretty handy function. Just undo that again. We can also go to choke and work the opposite way, so you might end up with the same thing, but you want to bring the color in. So you can choke it from 0, which is exactly as it was before, and choke it in so we only fill certain areas. And this is quite interesting for doing highlight colors that might be reflected off a light somewhere. If the person has sort of skin that's maybe slightly sweaty or something, it might be in a sports shot, you want to put some light in there. And then the final option we have is stroke, and it takes the area that you've got and applies a keyline around it, which again, you have control over. So this could be used as a very interesting animation tool. Don't forget we have Paint Bucket applied here to a moving piece of footage. If we play this back, obviously this area is going to shift and change, and it will look like someone has drawn around this with a red pen and followed it using animated keyframes. So all pretty good fun. What we're going to do is come all the way back to our feather option, and I'm going to set that to about 3, just to soften that out just a touch. And then we can go ahead and choose a brand new color for that. Now, we're obviously choosing here the color of my skin, so I'm going to go ahead and maybe choose green. Let's go for something very different. Say OK. And then all we need to do is choose the blending mode, very similar to what you would see in the timeline for the way the color is added to the layer beneath. So I could come all the way down here and choose color mode, which I would do in Photoshop as well, and that will apply the green as a color change to the skin. Now, if the color is a little too heavy, which it definitely is in this case, you can always reduce the opacity as well and just gently tint that back so it's more of a color adjustment rather than a color replacement. And you can always go in and say, let's up that tolerance a little bit and push it out more so it fills in the gaps that we have, okay? So this is the starting point of this. What I also like about this filter is that once you've got this point set and all the color changes done, you can pick that point up and drag it to different locations and just pick different pieces that you wish to fill with color. So I can drag up and say, let's have green hair, or we can come down here and say, change the color of the hand. What we're going to do in this case is fill the shirt, okay? Now, tolerance-wise, it is picking up some of the hair up there as well, so you can always come back to tolerance value here and just pull that back a bit to try and eliminate some of that, which is doing a pretty good job there, about 38. That'll do for now. And again, it will depend on exactly where you place this cursor. And then if I just move up the image here, we can see that the whole shirt has been changed to green, which is not the color I want, but the effect is what I need. So let's come over here and change the color to a blue. That's the color shirt that I need here. Any blue will pretty much do, because don't forget the color value is going to replace it. The color blending mode will determine how it actually applies to the layer beneath. Now, if we leave this point set here, we will encounter a small problem somewhere down the line. What I'm going to do is my time indicator is at 0 seconds. I'm just going to hit the space bar and play 1 frame at a time here so we can see what's happening. We've got our green cabs moving in the background. And then we'll see my hands joined together and it all looks pretty much okay at this point. But a little bit further along, what you'll notice is that a couple of frames will start to skip. And it's a little bit later on inside the animation. Let me just stop there and I'll move the screen over so we can see it. If I just scrub back there we go. We can see the problem. What's actually happening there is the color that connects the top and the bottom, the blue that feeds all the way through here, is actually based on the color going through this watch, okay? The colors in here are very similar to the colors in the shirt, so the blue is bleeding across. At some point as my hand moves, this color value here breaks, and therefore the paint cannot slide all the way through and fill this whole area. That's a very easy problem to get around because we have all the settings that we need. Let's come back to the effect controls here. I'm just going to close up the options. We've got this paint bucket option selected. I'm going to hit Command D or Control D on the PC to duplicate that effect. And all we need to do is to take the point for that effect and move it down here to the bottom of the shirt. Now we won't have any problem because the two are completely separate and there won't be any jumping frames there because they apply through the middle or when the watch is actually dividing them up. So we've encountered a pretty good problem there and solved it using the brand new paint bucket filter. Now, there are 2 other new color filters inside of After Effects 6, very quick and simple ones. We're going to take a very easy look at them. What I'll do is I'll close down the effect controls for this layer itself. And then down in the timeline, we have a layer that's currently disabled, which is layer 3. You can see here it says Color Link Solid. If I go ahead and turn that on, you'll see it's a white solid layer that has 2 mask paths. If I just select it, you can see them highlighted here in yellow, or I can hit the M key and show them here in the timeline. It has 2 masks which cut a hole right the way through the center of it. Now we're going to use a filter that is obviously called Color Link. So let's come up to the effects palette, click in the contains value and say color. That'll obviously bring up all the filters that begin with the word color. And if we scroll down here, we have a new one here called Color Link. So let's double click to apply that. And what it's done immediately has filled this layer with what looks like a very light gray. Now, the reason for that is there's actually no fill at all. The source layer here is set to the current layer we're looking at, which is Color Link Solid. Now, what this filter basically does is it fills the currently selected layer with an average of the color pixels from the current frame of the shot, depending on which layer that we choose. So what that basically means is it's going to analyze all the pixels that are moving in the background, because this is the layer we're going to choose here, the Cabs Movie, and it will take the average pixel color from that particular frame. Because it's doing it from the frame, if we hit the 0 key and do a RAM preview of that, you'll see that as the frames progress, that color value is going to change because obviously the average color is going to change during that time. So it's just one of those filters that you may find a use for at a certain point where you do need an item. It could be a mask, it could be an overlay of color applied to a keyed character that you need to change to reflect the average colors in the background. Now there's a couple of other things that might affect the way that it works. Let's just come back to the effect controls here. We do have an option to say stencil original alpha. You'll see that the filter has actually removed my masks as active items. So if I go ahead and turn that on, it will restore those. So we have the original whole. Then we also have the type of sample that we have here. So we have an average set of colors. We can apply the median, only the brightest of the darkest, or even use the maximum and minimum RGB values. Now either one of these presents us with another option, which is a clip function. If I choose maximum RGB, it will basically take the full range of color inside the layer that we've chosen, and then I can clip down a specific percentage of that. So if I do a preview at this point, because I've chosen maximum, you see here we have a lot more color. We're going from very light to very dark and back and forth again depending on the pixels in the background. There's a lot of motion in there. Well, the clip value will allow you to fine-tune that and squash it down so you only select a certain portion of that. And basically the maximum value we can go up to there is 50%. So it's actually going to clip out about half of the color and just focus on the top range, because we're going maximum here. It's going to focus on the top range of colors, and you'll see that they're very sort of muted, very dark, and those are the ones that are being picked just by using that clip value. Now again, you have other settings such as opacity, which will obviously introduce the original color of the solid, the lower that you put that. Or alternatively, if there was something on that solid that contained graphics, such as the footage here, if we apply the filter to it, you could also choose a blending mode and have that color apply to it. And this is where this filter, I think, really comes into its own. Imagine if you had a shot that had a cutout of a person or an object that's being placed in front of a video or a computer screen or a huge projection screen, and you need the luminance values or the luminescence of that screen to be casting color onto those objects. If you had the blending mode here set to color or hue, and you had the pixel colors of the footage that's in the screen that's being cast out, as long as it's on its own selectable layer, you could have that set to reflect onto the person or object and give it a good color balance there. So it looks like they're all inside the same scene and that color is transferring, and basically performing there with a very simple filter a seamless and normally quite complicated compositing task. So even though the color link filter looks very simple in its basic form, put a bit of imagination into it, you could get some really interesting results.